Welcome to the Central Ohio BIM User Group meetings for March. Glad you all can make it. It's nice to see a lot of new faces. Definitely the old ones. Glad you guys came back. Tonight, we're going to start with what we're planning is the first of a series for the Eye of BIM, the information. Tonight, I'm going to touch on parameters, kind of go over the basics. If you guys have questions, let me know. It's a very informal presentation, and kind of go over the definitions of the different types of parameters and how to apply them, where to look for them, and there's a lot more that we can go into, but for an hour presentation, that's not enough time. So that's why I came up with the idea of a series. It won't be one right after the other because we like to get some other topics in there throughout the year. As you saw earlier, if you have some ideas of topics that you guys are interested in, please let us know. If you have something that you would like to present, definitely open to that. Just let us know, and we'll get it set up on the schedule and go from there. All right. I did welcome, didn't I? So let's get going. I took this from the Autodesk website. Autodesk has just hit F1 when you're in Revit. It'll take you in Google, and a lot of their information is good. Sometimes it's not as in-depth as you would like, so I'm being a bad child here. But just finding the basic information you need. They have some good definitions. I probably did this backwards, but that's okay. Project parameters, they live in the project. They can be used in any category in the project file. Family parameters, they start out and for the most part they live in the family. They typically do not communicate with the project unless you're using a shared parameter. Shared parameters are very good for scheduling things that are in a family, information that you want to draw from it, like the size of the object. Perhaps there's a description that this object will always be. So you can go ahead and put that in there. Some are going to be out of the box. That's provided with Revit. Others you're going to customize because that's information you need for your workflows. Does that make sense? And then global parameters can be kind of cool, actually. I was playing with it. I haven't had an opportunity to use it in work, but definitely for architecture, let's say you have doors. Your doors, you typically want them to be so far from the face of wall to the hinge or even the frame. And with the global parameter, you can program that in. And so whenever you put a dimension there, you can put the door in sloppy, add that dimension, apply that parameter, and that'll put it exactly where you want it. So you're not having to measure and enter all the time. And then as you're going through it, if that particular parameter, because the code changed in the middle of the project, that never happens, I know. You need to change it, well, you just change that value in the global parameter, and it adjusts all those doors. Yeah, I felt smart when I figured that out last night. Beth Avenue with OHM provided this wonderful matrix, which basically lists the parameters and how they can be used in relationships to different things. It's created in the family, in the project, can it be used to tag. And by tagging, in this particular instance, it means it's reading from the element in your project. I'm learning to read, it's hard. Can you hear me now? Okay.
I can hear you before.
I was trying to be as discreet as possible. It doesn't work in this crowd, sorry. So I'll get that matrix posted on LinkedIn so you guys can get a hold of it. Because I think it's very useful, especially if you're trying to understand parameters, when to apply them, where to get them from, what works with which. So this is a good place to start understanding them. Because sometimes you can read all the definitions in the world, but when you have something as nice and concise and user-friendly as this makes a lot more sense. Helps you connect the dots. No pun intended.
Graphic, and I'm sure you know nothing about that.
Sometimes you just need a graphic. And that's the end of the presentation. Okay, thanks for coming. All right, I'm going to start with some of the family as soon as I get the mouse to work. This is an out-of-the-box bench or family from Revit. I've only made a few slight modifications. In your family types, this is where you're going to find the parameters that are available to it. Currently, all of them are out-of-the-box parameters. And all of these, because they're out of the box, the majority of them are going to be parameters you're going to find available that you can schedule. Having said that, there's probably one or two that aren't, but I believe all the out-of-the-box ones will schedule for you. Now, if I were to go in and to add something, this isn't a good one for that example. Sorry, I was starting to go down a rabbit hole. I apologize. Trying to think what right now it says bench material is cherry. You want something more than that, but you don't necessarily want to schedule it. And yes, the whole time I'm saying that this is a bad example for what I'm trying to show. Well, the basic thing about families, I think the next thing I need to jump into that would make more sense would just to go into shared parameters. Suffice it to say, any parameter that you create in the family that is not a shared parameter can only be accessed when you're in the family, unless it's an out-of-the-box parameter. Does that make some sense? Sort of. If there's something that you want to schedule in some way, for a bench, we might want to be able to apply an asset number to it. So we need to create a shared parameter for that. So to do that, select New, Shared Parameter, and then you'll select it. Now, typically, your office will have a shared parameter file. You typically don't want people to make individual shared parameter files because that can create chaos for you later. Because you might create one and it's called thickness, and it's applied to the a bench in some way. And so to the furniture family or generic model family. And then someone else might be working in a different family and they'll want thickness as well, but they're using a different shared parameter file. Revit applies an ID number to everything. So the thickness for the bench, for that shared parameter, that ID number is going to be different from the thickness parameter that someone else created in a different file, even though it's for the same category. When you load both of those into a model, you're going to see two selections for thickness. And it will probably only read from one of those files because that's where the information is being placed. So you want to have a central location for your shared parameter file. And in this instance, I don't have it. So for starting out, you'll create a new one, which I haven't done in a while, so I do apologize. So create, give it a name. I would say shared parameters is probably just perfect, but if you're the BIM manager, you will probably put something in the name so that you know it's for your firm. And I highly recommend that because it causes less confusion down the line. Feel free to correct me at any time. So now I need to...
For the architects or engineers in here, you might have one for specific projects or clients. Frequently, there may be one that's office specific. If you're from OSU or on the other side of things, you may have one that you provide to your consultants that has all of the things that you like them to track in Revit with specific parameters that get scheduled. So that's most often the types of things that you would use it for. So if this same bench is provided by the manufacturer, let's say you find it online someplace like BIM object or from an actual manufacturer site, they have their own parameters. Sometimes those don't always align with how you want it to work. So adding shared parameters to that based on how the client would treat that same piece of equipment or bench is really key to getting something that's repeatable, building the information into it that tags, that schedules, makes it easier to manage.
Yes, and on that, your client, if they have a formal facilities department and like asset tags is what I'm talking about now, they may have particular shared parameters they want you to use. You would want to make sure the name of your file is different from theirs. So that's why I recommend using your name, your company name in it, so it's easily identified. And also place it somewhere where everyone can access it. And discourage people from going in and making new ones just because they can, because that's where you get things that are the same name but might be applied differently. You also want to make sure they work, because here's the default. I want to make an asset tag. So I'm going to be entering probably letters and numbers. So I don't want it to default to a dimension. And this is always the default when you create any new parameter is length. So since I want to have text and numbers, go with text. It's going to be common, so it can be used with anything. Furniture doesn't fall under any of these categories. So common is the one you'll use most. So now you've created your shared parameter. Hit OK. And now I'm going to apply it by being selected and hit OK. Now from here, it can show up in text, or you can put it under other, if that's where you want your new ones to come from, or it can be part of identity data if you want. I'm going to default to other so we can track it a little better. It being an asset tag, it will most likely apply to each element. So if there are 5 benches, each one's going to have its own asset tag. That way they can track where it's located, when it was purchased, so on and so forth. Where if you do type, then you'll have the asset tag being applied to all of them. And so you want that flexibility. So you're going to make it, in this case, it'll be an instance parameter. Does that make sense between the difference of an instance parameter and a type parameter? Any questions there? Okay. Being an instance parameter, we're not going to pre-fill it. And we'll load that into our demo model. Ta-da! Welcome to the project I borrowed from Autodesk. Thank you. I worked very hard on it. So from here, we'll place it. And of course, furniture is not turned on. There we go. So we have lots of things. I think the bench looks good there. All right. So that shared parameter that we made now shows up under Other. And this is where we would enter the information. And that would be its asset tag number. I graduated from EKU, thank you. That's where that came from. So this is something that can now be scheduled. Now, I put this in, let's say the furniture you're using, you don't want to program this into each family. But you would like to be able to have that parameter available to be used. So one way to make that happen, I think, is to bring that in. Let me find my schedules. It works so well at my desk. All right. So new schedule. We're going to go, because we're doing furniture. Huh?
I'm guessing you're going to pick furniture.
No.
No.
No. No. I'm going to go back up here to the multi-category. Does anybody know why? I can pick more than one category. When you're in charge of your library, anything that's furniture, you're going to put it on the furniture category. When you get something offline, whether it's from Revit City or a manufacturer, sometimes they make it a generic model. So that's why sometimes your furniture schedules have to be multi-category so that it will include furniture. As soon as I find it. No, multiple. In the wrong spot. That's all you need to select is multiple categories. Oh. My apologies. So next you're going to select fields so that you can sort and gather the information. I always like to, you can do family and type together. This is a personal preference of mine. I like to do them separately. Other thing is, because asset tag came in on a family, it is now something that you can select and you can apply to everything in this. I believe. See what we get. All right, we don't need trees and shrubs. That's the downside to the multi-category, is you have to get rid of some stuff, like concrete columns, and you have to filter it. Yeah, let's make it simpler. Yeah, filter it so it contains bench. I was, right, keeps going. Let's try just doing furniture this time. And then select the fields that we're trying to track. Mark, type mark. Don't forget our asset tag. We worked very hard on that. All right. Any questions at the moment? So from here is where you would start filling. You could fill it in here. Let's see what's it. Okay, it's doing what I thought it might do. It's not letting me fill in. The only place we could probably fill it in is on that bench, which is probably a generic kind of thing. So we want to use that same asset tag, but we want to use it in multiple categories. And to go in and apply that to every family we're going to need it to be used with, it's going to take a long time to do. So here's a shortcut. We're going to put it into the project as a project parameter, or shared parameter. And that I did not practice earlier. So go to your project parameter, you're going to add it, shared parameter again. Now we're going to select it from that shared parameter file that we created. Hit OK. Because it's an asset tag, we're going to want it to be instance. And then decide where you'd like to find it. Just to keep it simple, I'm going to keep it at other, because that in your properties dialog box, it's at the bottom and it's easy to find. Next, you're going to select the categories you want it to apply to. In this instance, we're going to go with furniture. And generic furniture systems as well. All of that could tie into that. Sometimes you'll want to also apply specialty equipment. Well, you'll want to apply an asset tag to specialty equipment as well. And then to check that you've gotten everyone you want, all the categories that you want, check the unchecked categories and see if anything's missing. If it's not, move forward, hit OK. No. Now you've added that to the project, and now, I forgot about that. How rude. So now I can type in anywhere except where it's grouped, and do that. Groups is a whole other ball of wax. Groups are great because you can group a nice bunch of chairs together, but it has some hiccups, obviously, when you're trying to apply instance information to it. That's where you get into a hiccup. I don't have a good workaround for that at the moment, but when we get there at a future presentation, I will. Any questions so far about this? All right.
In the schedule view there, she's got the table dining round with chairs highlighted. At any time, you should be able to highlight a model.
Oh, yeah. That's my favorite.
Some of them work.
Well, that's a family. That's interesting. All right.
On schedule. Next one.
There it is. Thank you. And there it is. Revit does make it easy to find things most of the time. If you're having trouble locating it, everything's scheduled. So you can do what we did, which was select it in the schedule and highlight it in the model, and you can go find it that way. It's just another way to help track your information, make sure everything's the way it should be. All right. Show parameters. Does anyone use global parameters just yet? Do you like them? Was that a good example?
Yeah.
Okay.
In our template, we have a global parameter that I use to help in calculating code information. So the checkbox for sprinkled, sprinkled, it updates the
Nice.
things like that.
No, I think I hadn't. I just got as far as distances of things.
Yeah. No, I mean that's.
But no, that's a great one.
Code information or, okay.
Yeah. So you know how if you have if you're building sprinkler, you
Yeah.
your stair width thing, you get a lower number you can multiply by. So it's.
Has anybody not heard of globe parameters, I guess? It's a new feature that they've added in the past few releases, and they keep adding more and more functionality to it every release. It covers more and more categories. When I first heard about it, I was at Autodesk University attending a class on how to kind of make smart details. And in this instance, Brian Mackey does a class pretty much every year, was using global parameters to govern basically a fill region. You know, so we have this client, they like a concrete curb at the front of their store. In some cases, it's an 8-inch curb. In some cases, it's a 4-inch curb. And by using the global parameter that just says curb height, they can change it once, and then all of the details that are just drafting elements can be governed by that global parameter. So that's another one. The instance that Ann was discussing was basically how far off a door or wall is, or how far off an intersecting wall a door is. And typically it's like 4 inches, right? So she's saying that you can basically place the doors willy-nilly, drag a dimension line between the intersecting wall to the door jamb, assign it the global parameter of door offset, and then that global parameter governs that. So very easily you can update all your doors at once. So instead of 4 inches, we can do 3 inches. So that's how that works. It's a little bit nebulous in terms of finding it because it's not really obvious all the time.
Do you sort by ID or the type of door?
What's that?
How do you, for example, if you have multiples, are you sorting by the ID or the asset tag?
For the global parameter, This is more, it has nothing to do with the door itself. It has to do with, it being offset from a wall.
Yeah, but if you have multiple, different 32-inch door and 30-inch door, we want to select a specific one. Are you sorting by different door sizes?
Size of the door in that instance would matter because you're dimensioning to the door jamb essentially.
Oh, okay, sorry,
You
yeah.
have to apply the parameter to each door object first before it
I'm
takes
saying,
effect, or are you, okay.
I'm just saying hypothetically, like,
Oh.
For this particular,
You're doing a dimension to the center of the beam for each of those.
yeah, it'll be consistent, yeah.
yeah, this, thank you. Yeah.
And that's assuming that your door is not centered on the wall.
Right, and you would use this, apply it to doors that are just offset. And I would need to put a dimension in there and then apply the parameter, correct? Okay. You can see where that changed it to 4. And then if I wanted to edit that parameter and change it, it would change it everywhere I have that dimension. And it would move all those doors. And then brilliant idea, you can program in some of your code information. Depending on what code is going to determine how wide your stairway has to be. So you can program a global parameter for that, and it sounds like you can get a little creative. So that is global parameters. Any questions?
So this would be most effective if you're basically applying it as you're putting objects into the model, rather than, because thinking about a model that already has doors in locations without the parameter in place, you would have to essentially go back to each object and add it.
True.
And unless you got something really wizard and dynamo, maybe.
Well, and also this would be something that if you're going to use it on the project, that would be part of to me, the project prep. What do you want to use in it? What are you going to utilize? If you're going to utilize your global parameter like this, then as you're building the model, this is something you want to keep in mind as you're doing it. That way it gets applied in the instances where it is. Also make sure your design team is on the same page. And they're not just tossing in doors. Which doors need that parameter?
I haven't tried it, but conceptually, I think it might work this way. If you go into your door family and add a reference plane, essentially, and then string a dimension from the jamb to the reference plane, then when you place the door, I believe you have a grip, and the global parameter would be in the family already, and that would govern that. So I think you might be able to automate it a little bit more than having to come back in after the fact. But I haven't proven that, but conceptually, I can see it working that way.
Makes sense.
All right. Touch on family parameters. I showed you how to create project parameters. The interesting thing about project parameters is that any parameter that you put into Revit, whether it's, as I demonstrated, creating a project parameter by putting in a shared parameter, or it can just be one that's just going to live in the project. And you would do the same thing, give it a name, and apply it to the categories you want it to apply to. And it would only exist inside the Revit model. And that would be something, if you have a template and you don't want to fight with a shared parameter, you can pre-program it. Sometimes for doors, for instance, depending, you don't want your families to be information heavy because there's a lot of things that are just project driven. So in previous firms, we created project parameters for that purpose. They weren't shared parameters, but they only lived in the template. But they were part of the template, so everyone started on the same page. And you could schedule them, add them to schedules, and apply them to doors as an example. Windows is another, because there's certain information you always want to see. Is it fire rated? Is it not? Some of it's out of the box, as I mentioned, but there's usually some things that, however it is you set up your schedule for your firm, what information you need for, typically, is what you're going to start with. And sometimes you have projects that require a little more information or something specific. Instead of updating every door family you're going to use, you can do it by creating a shared parameter, but a lot of times just a project parameter that you can apply to a category, and then you can schedule it. Question?
When you have parameters that are instance-based and not type-based, and so let's use Ann's example of having multiple benches. It's the same piece of equipment, but they want different ID tags on them. In your schedule, make sure that itemize each instance is checked, because otherwise it will lump all of those benches together, and no matter, oh, I know I put information in 3 of those benches, why isn't it showing up? Well, it's because Revit doesn't know which of the 5 or the 3 that you've added the information to is the one that displays on there. So it's overlapping information. So check that setting in your schedule properties to see whether it's checked or unchecked. You want it to itemize, because each individual bench should be its own item and not grouped together.
When you create a project parameter, it defaults to instance. I highly recommend it be instance. It gives you more flexibility. Because if you put it in as a type, the nice thing is that it applies to every family type, if that's how you're going to use it. But you can still, simply by using some filtering in a schedule, update multiple elements to say the same thing. So I recommend always, as I already said, select instance. It gives you more flexibility with it. All right. Any questions? Anything else you would like demonstrated this evening?
Another possible use.
I'm going to throw it out there. So I'm relatively new to Revit and getting from the user standpoint. So in terms of like different parameters, are you able to do different parameters based on like different building codes? So if I'm building, or if I'm designing for a certain area that has a certain stipulation on building code, whether it be like width of a sidewalk, are you able to set shared parameters to where if I'm applying that to a different project that it would basically, could you set, I guess, building code parameters in BIM to make adjustments in projects based on certain geographical areas or where you're building? Does that make any sense? I'm sorry.
No, actually, it does make sense. It sounds like something that Beth has used and set up for OHM for certain things.
Yeah, I mean, it would be able to be done. It's not something that's automatic.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So if you tell it, excuse me, I swear I'm not sick. if you tell it that this is the sidewalk length, you have to know, we're changing code, I need to change that. It's not gonna know it on.
Gotcha, okay.
Another situation where you might use it could be frost depth as a global parameter, for example, where a footing depth might change from project to project. You could use that to govern your details, and they would stretch automatically based on that criteria. Just take some time. I know last time when we talked about, Beth and I talked last time about Autodesk University. Again, that's a free resource. Go in there, type up global parameters, see what pops up. Like I mentioned, some of the smart detailing tricks that I learned there. There's other instances. As I said, they're adding more and more entities that are governed by and influenced by the global parameters. So there may be new features that I'm not aware of. I use 19 on very few projects and 18 and 17 on everything else. So I haven't really seen all of 19 and none of 20 so far. So they've probably added more to it that I'm not aware of, but it's a good resource for that, for shared parameters, for best practices, for tips and tricks that a lot of very smart people with a lot of experience have figured out how to use it in the best way possible. So you can probably find something that works for you a little bit better. I would say more than likely you're not going to want to govern all of the sidewalk widths, because you may have an entrance condition that's also more or less sidewalk, but it's a thicker condition, and you wouldn't want to limit yourself that way. So maybe it's a minimum sidewalk thickness or something like that, or a different parameter that can be overridden.
And something we haven't really touched on, I don't know if you were going to or not, but in parameters, a lot of times you can use formulas. So, for instance, if you knew that you had 3 different codes that might apply, like if you're working in Michigan or Ohio or Tennessee, and those are 3 different codes that you know you work in a lot, and you could have a checkbox for it. Is this a Michigan project, is this an Ohio project, or is this a Tennessee project? And then for that list, you say, if Michigan project, then it's 5 feet, Ohio project, then it's 3 feet. Yeah. And that's how you can build a little more smartness into the parameters themselves, so that you don't have to go and look that number up necessarily. It's something that you need to be constantly looking at when you're building it in yourself, but make sure the codes haven't updated. They don't do, but thank you.
Like, what she said. But something as simple as a parking schedule, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a while since I've had to do the calculations, but based on the square footage and usage of the building, you'll have a formula for that. So you could create a formula here as part of it by selecting some fields. I was hoping it had area, square footage. I probably picked the worst example possible. I have set one up. I apologize. I don't have it set up. I didn't think to do that, but it's a great question. But for something, a number of parking spaces. So there's a family for parking spaces. But in this instance, you wouldn't really want to.
For an area, or if you have areas of rooms, you can take that.
I think you can start from there. This gives you circulation in the different areas in it, but it also gives you a grand total of gross square feet. And by using a schedule, I apologize, I haven't had to do these types of schedules in a while, so
A key schedule.
yeah, it's more like a key schedule. Not necessarily, but because you want it to read what the square footage of the building is, how many floors it is, whatever applies to figuring out that quantity that you're looking for. We'll stick with just basic square footage of the building, all levels. So you would take that, and based on the type of building it is, you'll divide it by whatever that number is, and you can program it into a formula. The place that you would be doing that is here, I want to say. So and it's going to be a number. Yes, please. I'm a little rusty. I do apologize. Basically, from here you can type BIM.
So you actually put the formula in, right? This mouse is funky.
It is funky. Yeah, it goes there.
So you can say area divided by, and to get it to be a number, you're gonna have to divide by, say, is it 1 foot squared? I remember. See, and divide by, so you have to keep consistent with your units. So if you're going to end up with a number and you're starting with an area, you have to get rid of the square foot zone. And then say it's 75 spots per unit, or spots per 45 square feet per spot. And right now you're going to see nothing because you know, show up. So you can get pretty much, you could build this in to be effective fields, where this 75 here, where that pulls from a different location, like another parameter, for instance, that you say that this is the parking count, and then as you give each type a different parking count ratio, it'll use that number, so you're putting more complexity into it.
It's obviously easier if the whole building is a single use versus mixed use, then they have to calculate by areas. So where you can get into that greater detail is with a key schedule, and what you would do is basically create each type of room based on the chart from the code book, where office is 100 square feet per occupant, storage is 300 square feet per occupant. So as you build the rooms, you're assigning a room type to that room, and then the schedule will create a grand total, and then you can take that total and divide it by the parking, whatever the zoning code is for that.
And as you can see, I just changed the formatting on this so that it was 0 decimal places, but it was all the way out to 3 or 4. And my point here is that if you, as you're talking about figuring out occupants, and that's very important to the code information for a project. If you set this to round, it's going to round each of these, but it's not going to round each of them and then add the rounded number. It's rounding
Down instead of up.
So by you setting the decimal
probably
number,
just
it's not actually rounding the number, it's just showing it as it's rounded.
Yes, so
Okay.
it can be possible to, if I could add all these up right now, but basically it's possible right now that that total does not equal the total of those 4 added together.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
So my point is that so,
It's doing floating point math behind, to use the coding term.
Yeah.
You could have the same errors in a dimension string if your tolerance is set to the nearest inch.
Exactly.
Where it's taken all the 16ths and 8ths and everything else and just shortening it, and at the end, well, my strings don't add up. That could be a reason why, is because your accuracy is set a little bit differently.
So there's a couple ways you can deal with that. One is to add something to the parameter itself to account for that, which you can, I think it's by adding, that will make sure that it rounds up, is one way to do it. Another is to just leave it at a decimal point. It's fine. Like, most people will look at it and be like, why do you have 3 decimal places? Because I want the code official to see the real number, not try to add it up himself, come up with a different number and think we're trying to pull something. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be doing formulas, especially with code information.
Another thing to keep in mind when you're using formulas and you're pulling in parameter names, when you give a parameter name, it's more than 2 words, don't use dash, because the formula, when you apply it to a formula, Revit will think it's a minus sign. And don't use a space, because that will mess things up when you're using a formula. So I always use an underscore whenever I'm putting a space between a number or words. That way, if you get in the habit of doing that for any parameter you name, you'll be able to use it in a formula later if you need to.
And there is a workaround for that. That's still best practice. Always do that.
There's a workaround?
There is a workaround. If you have a parameter that is, let's say this was called, well, it doesn't matter for this one because I'm not using a formula, but basically if your parameter is length width, and that's your parameter, it's going to think you're saying length minus width, but if you put brackets around it, so the little buttons that are kind of above enter and to the side, it will recognize that as a parameter.
Nice. Nice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions or something with
You take a look at all those projects, global parameters.
Sure, it's in the Manage tab. There's this kind of globe-shaped one. Sort of.
Yeah.
So that's where the global parameters live. As you add them, it'll filter into here, and it looks just like you would see in your parameters for a family. They're going to group the same way. You have the little buttons down here at the bottom, the same way in a family.
If you set up global parameters in one project, can you transfer them using transfer project standards?
Yes, you can.
Do they also pull out of the shared file, or is that separate?
That is separate from global parameters. You can, let's see, no, you can't do that yet, where you can use a shared parameter as a global parameter. I don't know if they're working on adding that or not, to be honest.
So then your best bet to use it from project to project, if it's not in your template to start with, is to transfer.
If there's anything else you didn't cover. It's a good idea. As you can see here, things are kind of prefixed with something. When you get into project parameters and shared parameters, for the shared parameters, you have the groups you can put them in, so it's a little easier. But when you put things into project parameters, they're just one big long list. So if you want things to group together, give them a prefix.
Absolutely. And even in your shared parameter file, thickness was an example I'd used thickness, width, or length. Even though you're using it in different groups, I still recommend putting a prefix in front of it that will tell you how it's being used.
And to clarify whether it's a built-in parameter or not. It's nice to have a visual reminder that this is either a prefix of your company. A lot of people do that. I don't really like doing that necessarily. I think it's a little, I don't know,
It's good to have a way to identify parameters that you're creating that are part of your firm's standards versus what's out of the box. Typically, what's out of the box is going to have a capital letter followed by lowercase with each word. You can make it as simple as the ones you're creating, all caps. Prefix has been used before, like we could use SMBH and then whatever the name is. And that's fine too, whatever you want to use as an identifier so it's obvious what parameters are out of the box and what ones have been created specific for your firm's workflows.
It's a pretty good chance if you're modifying an out-of-the-box parameter that Autodesk is going to change it in the next release, and that could have unintended consequences. So what Ann suggests of separating content that you're customizing from the out-of-the-box content is just it's a smart policy.
All right, any questions about parameters?
Does everybody like the little bit more of the hands-on experience than somebody just talking? I have questions every day. I'm sure you guys have questions every day. It's part of what we're here for. We've got a lot of experience in this room. So if that's you know, a certain segment that you'd like to have every week of, you know, what's my problem, we could do that as part of the format going forward. If we need less time eating and socializing, a little bit more time problem solving, and still teach you a thing or two, we're open to suggestions. We're very happy to be pushing the threshold of the coronavirus size limits. Thank you all for coming and braving the mystery disease.
I thought it was kind of interesting, one of the classes at the Midwest University coming up. I don't know if they've done this before in Autodesk or anything, but almost like it's Ask the Experts, or they have maybe a half dozen guys up there instead of one. Bring your problem. And I don't know if we want to try to do that one time and see if collectively somebody in here can answer the problem.
There's lots of times that I've thought about creating a game show based on solve this Revit problem, because I get text messages from people on Skype saying, hey, I've got this item I can't see in my plan. What's going on? Is it in a design option? I don't think so. Oh man, you could. You know, so.
Visibility problem.
Yeah.
Million answers. There's a million possibilities in that.
Oh yeah. Is it on the right work set? Favorite. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm very new at this, and I've been thrown to the wolves. So you're looking at a nervous wreck at 56 years old right here. About 23 years with a company just doing, design build, and I've recently moved on. My question is, and I've been doing the videos at home all night. I haven't slept. So, does anybody recommend buying a book, Revit 2020 or 2019, in addition to the videos that I'm going to YouTube and playing? What's my best plan of attack to get through this, because the pressure's on? And trust me.
Have you limited yourself to YouTube for tutorial videos so far, or?
So far I have.
Okay, so there's a website called lynda.com. It's LYNDA.
Now LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It is LinkedIn Learning. I think you can still get to Lynda.
It's in both
But
places.
get yourself a Columbus Metropolitan Library ID card.
That's the answer.
You have free access to all of Linda's videos, whatever it's calling itself now.
Yeah.
And you can go free through professional tutorials, 2 minute to 4 minute, just segments of, oh shit, that's how it works. Yeah.
I've seen them
very structured.
Some really cool stuff. There's one guy who did a little video on how to make a key plan that automatically updates with your actual building model. There's crazy stuff if you want to do that, and there's simple stuff too. So
I got a problem with that. I think about 50 years ago, I didn't return the book.
They're very lenient now.
They forgave those, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very lenient about that now. Another option is Autodesk University Online, because they, with each class, typically, most of the time, they have handouts. And depending on, and videos, and sometimes it's nice to have the handout to be able to read if that's how you like to learn. They also have the video that you can play over and over, how much you need to. That's where most of my learning came from initially, because that was what was available. And you're learning from your peers. And you'll have access not to just this year and last year, but previous years. And just type in the topic you're looking for, and it'll list the classes.
That's sort of the problem too. You were asking earlier several times, any questions? I'm thinking like, I don't even know the question that.
That'd be the problem with having the book too. You wouldn't know what to look up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And I was wondering that.
What's your field?
Electrical. Solo or in a group of people? I am solo at this point. I work for electrical contractor with an engineering firm, again, for all those years. They had a BIM group. I was contacted by another company that wanted to start a BIM group, because obviously it's where it's going. And they twisted my arm some damn how. I could have skated another kid years, but I was a dying where I was, you know, I wasn't having anything turn the whole brain, so I was like, oh, wow, the last 10, 15 years, we'll have some fun. This game is fun. I'll get through this, I'm trying to, again.
Well, the nice thing about the group is that we have pretty good balance. There's architecture firms, there's engineering firms, there's contractors, there's, OSU is here, so we've got a pretty wide range of different users and focuses. KLH Engineering is one of the groups that's here. Kevin Eldridge has presented a couple times. They've created their own custom content. They're an MEP firm in German Village. If you are struggling with things, you can email me, I'm sure you can email some others, or we can certainly bounce it around and try and find answers for you to help you out on your journey.
Well, ideally, that's what kind of the LinkedIn and.
I'm assuming you're coming from AutoCAD.
Yeah.
So it's really is just the methodology is a lot different. On the Revit side, things are more along the way that architects and engineers work. The tools are kind of logical, whereas before in AutoCAD, it was a little bit more generic CAD and drafting and lines and layers and all that. Revit handles the set management, document management side of it very well. It's essentially is a big database. And really, if you actually look at the backup files, it's almost like a zip file where everything is its own little element with its own ID. Revit kind of ties it all together. So the sooner you get into it and start using it, it will make more and more sense to you as you go, essentially. It's just a different way of working, but the database fact that everything is tied to everything else is where the power is.
They have Revit Essential Training for it, and they have working files. So you download the working files and work a lot with it. I think that's how it is for a lot of people that are design industry, working in it. That's the way I learn.
Makes sense.
Autodesk University does have a lot of MEP-specific courses with Revit and MEP disciplines, so definitely look there.
Did you say you had been to Autodesk University?
Yes, I've been twice.
Was that?
I think it is, yes. He mentioned Midwest University.
Yeah, I signed up for that one, and actually got canceled.
Yeah, just got canceled last night.
That one is a lot more intimate. There's not, 500 different vendor booths and thousands of different courses on everything in Autodesk's software line, essentially. I've not been to it, but it's one that I would highly recommend and would like to go, but I think we're limited to 2, and Autodesk is 1, and I think we're going to Built-in A in San Diego, I think, assuming that one is running. Built-in A and Midwest University are 2 that are more user-focused as opposed to vendor-focused and Autodesk-driven, so that's where you see a lot of the good tips and things. It's very easy to get lost at Autodesk University because there's about 12,000 people there. You're shuttling in between floors. It's a very, one hotel and convention center, 4 floors of classes.
With the class schedule too, so it's best to pick the path that they have set up if it's your first or second time.
If you're going to
Pick
go.
your individual classes.
If you're going to go, sign up early, go through all the courses, pick the courses that you want, register for the courses early because they do book up fast. And in my instance, I couldn't until like 2 months after it had opened, so most of the classes that I wanted to take weren't available, so anyway.
What time on the golf course?
If you do go in the classes you want, like if there's only, I have to go to this class and it's full, if you wait at the door until all the people that have registered go in, they will let extra people in, because a lot of times people don't show up.
On a heater. Don't go if you're on a heater. It's in Vegas, hey.
Any other questions, thoughts? Did you like this format?
Yeah.
Okay.
Rather than just, it depends on the subject.
It does depend on the subject. There are some subjects that will lend itself better to a more formal presentation, and others where this is perfect. At any of the meetings, if you have something you're trying to figure out, bring it to the meeting. We can spend part of that trying to figure it out, helping you with it if you want. Because the goal of the group is to help us as a group become better at BIM, because there is a lot to learn. It's not just Revit, it's other things. It's not just the software, it's how you use the software. There are better ways to do it than what Lindsay.com just taught me, or what I just saw on Autodesk University. How are you handling this situation? So bring those kind of questions with you. Another forum, if you wanted to ask questions, we have the LinkedIn page. So you could post something there. Since we only meet every other month, that's one way to reach out to people. If you haven't already joined, please do. And I'll go through the email addresses and send you all invites if you're not already members. That's another way where we're I always make announcements there of what's next and what's coming up. I also announced AI TAP Committee is doing a Dynamo script share later this month. So things like that. Try and help promote other groups as well, where you can get additional information and learn something else. As we grow and get bigger, we might do some joint presentations with other committees like that. If there's topics you'd like to see or learn more about, we'd like to hear about that too. And with that, thank you for coming. Hope you enjoyed it, learned something new, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
I'm in the cheese.